When you look at the investment cycle in the technology industry, you better understand the technology cycle first. And then there's a lag effect on the investment cycle, and you really are trying to correlate them. You don't want to be too late, and in many cases, you don't want to be too early, which is extremely hard to do because you don't know exactly where you are in the cycle. There has been a pattern, whether it was the internet, whether it was mobility, whether it was crypto, and now AI. So we got very aggressive, and together with Toby and Harley, why don't we raise $100 million?
Welcome to Challenger X. I'm Jerome Dwight, entrepreneur, investor, and business leader. Every episode, I sit down with a challenger, a leader rewriting the rules, redefining the industries they operate in, and shaping the future of business. Today, I'm talking to John Ruffalo. John was named Canada's #1 most powerful business person by Canadian Business Magazine. He's the founding CEO of OMERS Ventures, now one of the largest pension funds in Canada. He was an early investor in Shopify and is now the co-founder of Maverix Private Equity, one of Canada's leading private equity firms in technology. He survived business and personal challenges, including facing a near-fatal cycling accident, leaving him paralyzed, and has come out stronger on the other side. John is like the godfather of technology investing in Canada and is a true maverick in the ecosystem. We're lucky to have him on, so let's get started. All right, so John, welcome to the show. I am honored to have you. You are one of the icons of the tech and innovation space here in Canada. So I know you're very busy, so thanks for being on the show.
No, my pleasure, Jerome. Thank you for the invite.
So I want to go back and talk about your early career days and how you got into the tech space, the innovation space, the investing world, because you've made a serious impact in Canada and around the world in terms of identifying great companies, getting them up with the capital they need, and so forth. So what first sparked your interest in technology, in investment, and helping companies get off the ground?
Sure. Well, it first happened by accident. So my move was really made in 1992, before people really understood what was happening in tech. I was a young employee at an accounting firm called Arthur Andersen, which has subsequently merged with Deloitte. And 1992 was significant in that it was the pit of a very deep recession that had occurred between 1990 and 1992. And I was about 25, and I was I was trained as a tax advisor, but I was getting very bored because in the depth of a recession, one of the areas of expertise was around transactions, and there just weren't any. And what was bothering me at the time was I was less intrigued about taxation policy and more about why did entrepreneurs make the decisions that they did. And I really wanted to hang with the entrepreneurs and not just simply be a tax advisor to them. And when I looked at the variety of the leading industries at the time, the problem was I was 25 years old, and the CEOs or the entrepreneurs were at least double my age. And who was I to think that they would want to hang with me so I can learn from them? But there was one industry, and that was the tech industry at the time. It was very, very nascent. I had two small clients at the time, Microsoft and Oracle, and I kind of liked what they were doing. And I basically said to the partners at the time, hey, look, I really want to scratch my desire to understand entrepreneurship better, would you mind if I were to build the technology practice here? And in hindsight, they looked at me like a chuckle, went, yeah, go for it. Knock yourself out, because the business was basically zero revenues, and
Right.
so they just thought, why not go for it? And I experienced about 3 years of total goose eggs on that business, in addition to doing my normal day job. And it wasn't until late 1994 when the world changed, and that was the release of Mosaic by Netscape, and the consumer internet was born. And all of a sudden, those 3 years of goose eggs was replaced with millions of dollars of fees, and it just exploded. And that was really the beginning of my career.
Hmm. I was going to ask you, were there some pivotal moments that started to accelerate investments in tech? Because you seem to have seen it before it actually became a massive opportunity as it is today. So what were some of the markers you were seeing that were telling you, you know what, technology is going to be transformational for Canada?
Yeah, it was in that I would honestly tell you, between 1992 and 1995, kind of wondering, geez, did I make a mistake? But I was just learning voraciously at that time. So I used that 3 year window to understand technology and what was really happening. But the seminal moment was around that 94, 95, when all of a sudden the ability to imagine what the internet would bring you. We were all talking about the internet beforehand, but it was very focused around educational organizations or governments, and it really was inaccessible for most people. And we were uh, trying to access the internet using rudimentary techniques. But when Netscape came out with Mosaic browser, the term surfing the web became live. Now, the reality is you were surfing and looking and watching, but doing nothing with it.
Mm.
But the imagination started, and there was already the promise of what the internet can do for you. And the old adage was, you could get what you want, how you want to get it, um, and 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 um, and access it at any time. But that promise of the internet really didn't occur until, ironically, the dot-com crash that would occur about 7 years later.
Mm. Yeah, I was going to say, like you, I've seen numerous cycles since 2000. How is your approach to investing in tech, in early stage companies? You've seen the dot-com boom and bust, and you've seen the financial crisis. How has your approach to investing changed?
So in the late 90s, so I would say really between 98 and 2001, was the dot-com gold rush. And at that time, I was an advisor to many dot coms plus venture capitalists. And what was frustrating to me, I came from a financial background, and I couldn't figure out why value was being dictated based on anything other than ultimately the cash flow of a business. And it very much confused me. And there were these terms that value was based on eyeballs, impressions, all of these other things that, I got to tell you, I was still relatively young, and I was overwhelmed. And I would just say, man, why can't I, like, why am I having such difficulty understanding value? Until I understood it, that's when the implosion occurred. And it wasn't until the implosion that I finally realized, you know what? I get the hype cycles. I also get, as an investor, and this took 20 years of evolutionary thinking on my part, was when you look at the investment cycle in the technology industry, you better understand the technology cycle first. And then there's a lag effect on the investment cycle, and you really are trying to correlate them. You don't want to be too late, and in many cases you don't want to be too early. So there's this kind of Goldilocks of investing, which is extremely hard to do because you don't know exactly where you are in the cycle. However, there has been a pattern, whether it was the internet, whether it was mobility, whether it was crypto, and now AI. It goes through a cycle, and it kind of goes through three layers, at least the technology cycle. There is an infrastructure layer first. And let's just use the internet as just the base analogy. The first cycle was you got to build the physical infrastructure. So in the mid to late 1990s, that was the pipes, fiber optics, et cetera. Who were the most valuable companies in the world at the time? It was the Nortels, the Alcatels, the Dow Cornings, et cetera. And the issue with the infrastructure layer is that you need to build the highways first. Once you build the highways, you got to build the tolls on the access points and how to get onto the highway and run your vehicle across. Call that the access layer or the middleware slash operating layer on top. And then the final layer is the application layer. So what are you going to do on this thing now that you're driving on the road? What's interesting is when you go through those three phases, the infrastructure layer tends to commoditize, and there tends to be dominated by a few very key players because it requires massive amounts of capital, and people don't want to make 82 infrastructure decisions. And then it ends with the application layer. Now, here was the interesting thing, and I still believe in this as well. I was advising telcos very extensively in the late 1990s. And one of the concerns that I raised many, many times, and you could see it, is they ignored the application layer. So the telcos were really the middle. They provided the access, right? So there was a terminology called the internet service providers, or ISPs. The telcos became the ISPs, and they made a ton of money through their subscribers. So all they were doing was giving the access. But I kept on saying, yeah, but access is going to get commoditized too. Where the extraction of the economics ultimately arises is at the application layer. So let's run this 20 years. Who makes all of the money on the internet? Is it Google, Apple, Microsoft? Go on, and they extracted it. And at the very bottom are the telcos, and below that was the Nortel. So where did Nortel go? Bankrupt. Where are the telcos? Struggling like crazy. And that application layer. So I think that's mirroring over and over and over again.
Wonderful framework, something that I think we can all think about as we look at all of the new companies coming out onto the market, even related to AI. I want to turn a bit to your experience with OMERS Ventures and Maverix. OMERS was a company that, or a platform, an investment vehicle that you formed as its inaugural CEO. Very iconic in the Canadian marketplace, a major investor now in the space. Can you talk us through that journey and how you got to OMERS and started investing?
So after the dot-com crash, it wasn't until around 2005 where Canada hit the bottom of the cycle. And and the reason is lots of venture capitalists raised capital in 2000 and 2001, and it takes anywhere from 3 to 5 years to deploy your capital. So by 2005, there was really no new capital being raised, and the United States was able to lift itself back out and start a recovery. Canada wasn't. And my big concern was a lot of the clients that I had at, subsequent to Arthur Andersen, we merged with Deloitte, was I was the leader of Deloitte's technology practice, and you could clearly see that the market was on the precipice of shrinking dramatically. So I started very aggressively looking at how to reignite the sector by looking at how to provide access to capital. And unfortunately, at the time, a private solution was not in the cards at all. And I started working with the federal government and was actually borrowing off the Israeli Yozma model and how they built their venture capital ecosystem there. And over the next few years was working very closely with the government on a variety of ideas, one of which was pointing the finger at pension funds and their lack of investing in Canada. It's kind of funny. Well, yeah, the ideas always come full circle. But at the time, it was egregious that they used to be a source of capital for the venture funds, but they all pulled out after the financial crisis. So they basically went to zero all across Canada. And I started going after them hard. And one of them was OMERS, and the CEO, Michael Nobrega, contacted me to share with me that he actually wanted to get back into the innovation ecosystem, but not as a traditional partner in venture capital funds. And I was thrilled. And he said, but I want you to be our advisor on how we should do it, because he just didn't know what to do. He knew what he wanted the result to be. And by the third meeting, he said, I really didn't want you as an advisor. I wanted you to figure it out and build it, and we'll give you the capital. And, my reaction was, well, I wasn't looking to go anywhere. Why are you picking me? I am not an investor. And he said, hey, you've been poking at us. He goes, you think you're so damn smart. Why don't you build it yourself and show me how it's done? And it was kind of hard for me to then turn around and go, no, dude, I was just joking, or I like to criticize, but I don't like to do. And so I felt compelled. And the advantage point that I had is I was an advisor to many venture funds, not only in Canada, but around the world. And I was able from that perch to see why the good ones were great and why the bad ones were so bad. And I was able to kind of cobble up those best practices. And as part of my agreement of joining OMERS, I had negotiated that these are the 5 critical principles that must be adhered to. Otherwise, I was absolutely thrilled with remaining at Deloitte. And OMERS basically said, yep, it's fine. We'll say yes to all of them. And there was really no turning back then.
Wow, what a story. And on this show, we talk about challengers who sort of challenge the status quo. And you are clearly doing that. You're stepping into a very new role. And there must have been resistance and challenges from traditional investors at the time.
Yes.
Can you reflect on some of those?
Oh, yes. Yeah. I had one jackass who shall remain nameless, that actually was quoted in a newspaper 1 month before my joining, basically saying that OMERS was going to mess up the ecosystem, whatever the hell that meant. Largely because here's a guy that's not a traditional investor, but what they didn't know is, even as a professional services advisor, and by the way, a VC is a professional services organization, and many forget that they're in business to serve the entrepreneur, not the other way around. But instead of investing capital, I was investing time, and not only my time, but my team's time and resources. So over the course of the last 15 years, I was very much being an investor already, and got burned many times, and also succeeded. And so it wasn't as green as people had thought. But the real opportunity was, the entrepreneurs cheered the move by OMERS. Competition jeered it, and I don't really care about competition. Never worried about it, and you just keep your head down and focus in on why you're there. And it was only to serve the entrepreneurs, and by serving the entrepreneurs, I would be able to get the requisite returns to serve the pension holders of OMERS, and it worked spectacularly well. But I would say to you, you're always on the precipice of either being viewed as a genius or a fool in the investment game. And the truth is, you're really neither. You just got to not think you're going to outsmart the market, and it is a risk reward trade-off. But there was a seminal moment, even as an investor, where we took a lot of heat. And I got to tell you, internally, we were worried that, we're looking like fools. But it turned out to be the right bet. And the comments that I only followed was what the entrepreneur said, not what, say, other VCs or investment professionals had said.
Phenomenal. So you've clearly made a mark as being able to spot globally successful companies. You're known as one of the early investors in Shopify, other notable successes like Wattpad and so forth. Shopify is an iconic company. You went in early when people were still trying to figure out Shopify early on. Can you give us some color on what made you take a leading investment in Shopify so early?
Yeah, I mean, we were first introduced to Shopify in 2011. So knew it, was following the story really. I would say about 3 years beforehand, around 2008, 2009, while I was still at Deloitte. So in 2011, when I was building OMERS Ventures, there were still no employees at the time other than myself and my assistant. Shopify had approached us to solve a problem, and it was a technical tax issue where they needed a Canadian investor to avoid them from going offside of being a Canadian-controlled private corporation. And they just needed $3 million. And knew the company. And at the time, I had an individual, Peter Koresha, helping me out while I was buried in trying to build the organization. And we looked at it, and we were both excited about it. But I said that we asked for a board seat. Probably didn't think we were going to get it with only $3 million, but we said, yeah, we'll just take an observer seat. And the deal was absolutely no governance of any kind. And the problem was that I'm 3 months into building this organization. A pension fund already has a negative viewpoint by the market. And I was going to do my very first deal with zero governance, zero value add, et cetera, et cetera. And I just thought, oh my God, it's going to bury me in that this is what people have been waiting for and why it's a disaster for pension funds to do so. So we, because of our defining principles, said, no, we can't do that under that basis. And then once we finally launched, my number one priority was to go back after Shopify and see if we could have a significant investment into their next round. And it was over the course of the next 2 years that we chased them. And it was, a view that people forget. Shopify was one of 3 competitors in the same market space. They're all small. It was Shopify, a company called BigCommerce, and another one called Volusion. I think that's what it's called, which I don't even remember anymore because it's basically gone.
Yeah.
And the 3 were of similar size, slightly targeting different parts of the market. And the idea was that when you looked under the hood at Shopify, you could clearly see this is going to be a fast-growing company and a very fast-growing segment. So we got very aggressive, and together with Toby and Harley said, why don't we raise $100 million? Now, this is 2013. You might as well have said $10 billion because that's what it felt like. Yeah. And I got to tell you, I was shitting my pants the whole way through. And what I said is, let's do a $100 million fundraise and I will take half. The problem was it did breach all of the controls that I put into place in terms of concentration, all this stuff. And I did speak to the CEO of OMERS and I just said, look, I need your approval on here. I'm going to breach all the controls and all the portfolio construction I put into place. But this is a special one. And Nobrega had said, John, I got your back on this. It's all he said. And I said, great. So we did that deal. I can't remember if it was in 21. It was a ridiculously fast period of time. And that was really a seminal moment. It wasn't the first moment that we did something, rather, on the edge, but that's where we caught the attention of other investors, particularly in North America, that in Canada, we're not going to sit idly by while U.S. investors in particular were going to snap up all of the great assets.
Great story. And then you moved to Maverick. You founded Mavericks, and that's now become one of the leading investors in Canada. Talk to me about what prompted you to move to Mavericks, and what your investment principles are around that.
So when I built OMERS Ventures, there was actually, this is now 2011, there was a 3-part plan, and you could still see it if I shared with you the deck. So this deck was done 14 years ago, and you could see that it was 3 phases. And to overly simplify, the 3 phases of growth was a company in the 0 to 10, so call that the seed A round, 0 to 10 million in revenue. Then the 10 million to the 100 million, so call that when scaling really starts, and call that the Series B/Series C, using that parlance. And then the 3rd phase was taking it from the 100 million to the $1 billion plus. Call that just like Shopify. What had happened at OMERS was that for the first 2.5 years, the focus was on the 0 to 10. And Shopify was really, by 2013, you started to see that there were many companies that were getting through to the 0 to 10 stage way faster than expected. So we started to look at the 10 to the 100 million stage. So when we invested in Shopify, if I recall, I think the revenues for the year ended was $13 million, but going from 13 to I can't remember, 26 or 30, something like that. But you can clearly see it was going to 100. And so what we had done was we said, okay, don't forget the 0 to 10, but now let's add the 10 to the 100. And that those two stages really drove the strategy from 2011 to about 2017. And then in 2017, developed a new strategy or an adjunct strategy to go from the 100 million to the billion plus. And that was OMERS growth equity. And that was to sit between venture and the buyout private equity. And you could clearly see that this was a gulf between those two investing styles. And in 2017 is when I had approval to build that business, kind of very much mirrored on how I built the OMERS Ventures business. But it became very clear in 2018, two things, that it was going to be more challenging to build a middle business between two existing businesses, number one. And number two, the gulf was, or the opportunity was so great. Why not build that myself in my own platform where I don't have to squeeze it in between two existing platforms and somehow get squeezed on either side. So that's why and how Maverix was born.
Incredible story, very inspiring, and equally inspiring, shifting gears here is how you've had to come back from personal challenges. I want to talk a bit about some of those. In 2021, you had a life-altering accident that was life-threatening. Talk to us a bit about that and how you kind of came back, your personal resilience, and here you are, investing again.
I started Maverix, or fundraising for Maverix, in 2019, and very early on had got the attention of pension funds to be the anchors. And once I finally found two pension funds that shared the vision that I had, we had agreed that we would start closing the fund in the spring of 2020. Well, something called COVID came along and completely annihilated any opportunity to raise. And it wasn't until around August or so where the pension fund said, okay, the world is not ending. So let's try this again and start a closing process in the fall of 2020. So around October of 2020. So we were gearing up for that. And it was September of 2020. In preparation for all of the things that I needed to do to think about how to close the fund and getting really excited and starting to think about all of our hiring needs, et cetera, because it was COVID as well too. And I'm a serious cyclist. I had cycled, did my normal midweek ride is, 100K ride. I'd live in the city and I go out north of the city and just, clear my head. And you really couldn't go in a Peloton just again because of COVID. And that day that I left my house, I never ever returned, and was hit from behind by a 18-wheeler who still to this day, I have no clue why they wouldn't have seen me where, I'm hugging the side of the road, but they hit me from behind and caused enormous damage. To this day, the doctors didn't understand how getting hit at 90 kilometers an hour from behind didn't instantly kill me, but probably should have. But I then, had, devastating injuries, including the paralysis from the waist down, and spent the next 4 months in hospital, just trying to recover. And I left hospital. I actually checked myself out of hospital. I was just tired of being in there, despite me really still being a mess, and left the day or two, I can't remember now, before Christmas, because I wanted to spend it with my family, and healed more so at home, and went back to work in the new year. And 90 days later, we closed that fund.
Wow, what an inspirational story, John. Quite moving. We have a lot of entrepreneurs who are facing setbacks. What advice do you have for them who deal with setbacks, and how do you build your resilience to come back?
Well, it's funny, for years, I was always asked a similar question of what thread of success do you see amongst all of the entrepreneurs that you've backed? And the one characteristic of success was the resiliency and passion of those founders who wanted to solve a problem that was gnawing at them, and they would go through all lengths of the earth to solve it. And they weren't driven by money or ego or status. And I constantly talk about this, and lo and behold, who would have thought that I'd be eating my own words in that uh, I now had to deal with not a business challenge, but a physical and emotional one. And I kept my eye on the prize. My number one prize was the health and safety of my family. When you get an injury as devastating as I did, and you're confined to a wheelchair, um, everybody's world in your family turns upside down. Like, I still had not. I left my house on September the 2nd, 2020, and never returned to this day. I could not physically get into the house. So we had to sell that house, get a new house, all from me, lying in a bed. And I had young children at the time. So you then quickly realize that all that your kids really cared about was that you were alive, not whether you were in a wheelchair or all the things that you can't any longer do. And it started to make me realize what was truly important. It's the same thing from the work perspective, keeping your eye on the prize of, at the end of the day, I didn't need to build Mavericks for my own status or personal wealth. It was, I didn't finish the job that I set out to do in 2011. And entrepreneurs need this. Canada needs this. Ultimately, my children need this if I want them to stay in Canada. So it was that objective that was, my North Star. So when I give advice to entrepreneurs, um, you know, you will face these obstacles 100% of the time in your business. And for the most part, it's not the end of the world. You can get around these things. It's a state of mind. So I would just share to folks. And, one of the best compliments that I do get from entrepreneurs is they would say to me, you know what, I thought, everything was just horrible and I couldn't get any lower. And then I see what happened to you. And they said, Jesus, my problem doesn't seem so big anymore. I should just shut the hell up, put my head down, and try to fix the problem and work around it. And so if I could be an inspiration for that, that's quite satisfying.
John, you certainly are an inspiration. In the final moments of our show, I want to ask you, you're very passionate about the health of the Canadian ecosystem. You are a leader in our space. I've heard you speak at numerous events about the need for maintaining Canadian talent, Canadian ecosystem that's healthy. Can you talk to me about where you see the opportunities and the areas we need to improve to create an environment for the future Shopifys of the world?
Sure. Yes. So when I look back again over the course um, of my career, uh, being in tech in Canada between 2005 to 2010 was as low as it got. It was terrible. And people, particularly the young kids who are graduating from university, were leaving Canada, um, not because they wanted to, but because there wasn't sufficient number of companies for them to work for. And this was a big, serious issue up until about 2011, which coincided with the launch of OMERS Ventures. And then there was an influx of capital for the next decade. And it was a period of enlightenment for the technology industry. And, we had COVID and the market correction, and the mood is feeling a little bit like 2009, where you're hearing again of the kids wanting to go, or entrepreneurs saying, am I better off in the United States? And, it certainly is disappointing. And there's some things that we've done as an ecosystem, whether it's public policy, academic, corporate, but everyone has their responsibility, and we have lost our eye off the ball. Um, but here's the good news: it's all fixable. We just need to be focused in on that. So, if you ask me, where is my head at in terms of the innovation ecosystem? I am long-term optimistic, or I should say medium to long-term optimistic for the sector. This is the future of Canada, and the entrepreneurs that we have in Canada, I put them up against anyone in the world. We may not have as many in the United States, but the quality is just as good, and we got to remember that. And I've seen entrepreneurs, and I've had a career of meeting with them all over the world. And Canada doesn't come in second to anyone in the world. However, in the short term, we need to fix these impediments to get out of the way to prevent these entrepreneurs from maximizing their success. So we need to deliver for them. We need to provide them access to capital, to talent, and customers and markets. We deal with those three things for them. Again, all fixable. We can get back to the level of optimism. So, again, when I get a room together of Canada's entrepreneurs, and you take away a little bit of that pessimism because of their frustration, underneath is this big desire to build great, big global companies based in Canada, just like a Shopify. And there's many more to come, in my view.
That's exciting, and we're certainly looking forward to seeing those companies come to the surface. My last question to you, John, is on this show we celebrate entrepreneurs, leaders who challenge the status quo. They are inherently, made to be challengers. You certainly have built your whole career challenging the status quo and going against the grain, if you will. In your mind, what does it take to be a challenger? How does a challenger think and act from your lens?
That's a interesting question. To some extent, a challenger doesn't care what others say, because there's always resistance. And if you're focused in on the North Star, what you believe is the right thing to do, there is always folks that are there to shoot you down and to criticize, but never ever worry about that, because it actually says more about the critics. And there's the old adage, and I'm going to misquote it, but it's the poem about the arena and fighting in the arena. If you come to my offices, it is wallpapered right where our team is. And we look for people who want to fight in the arena. And it does mean you're going to get bloodied. It does mean it's going to hurt. And when you're fighting in the arena together, arm to arm, magic does happen. And folks that are either hiding behind or, hiding in the bathroom of the arena until it all kind of goes away, and then starting to be the armchair quarterback, they don't matter. And they're not in that fight. So if you want to be in the arena, that's what it means. And it does mean for you to speak up, not because you're being a critic, it's because you really, really care about the outcome. And we need way more of that in Canada, for people to speak out and to speak the truth. And I think our whole country will be far better off if we do so.
It's a great way to end the show, John. Thank you for your time. I am honored to have gotten you on the show. You've been an inspiration to me personally and to everyone here in Canada who's been watching your journey. Thank you very much.
Great. Well, thank you, Jerome. Appreciate it.